Hello, everybody. We are here to continue our travel of this year's claim of this year's keyword, which is seeing life through a different lens, contactless connection, and we continue our travel today with a friend of mine, which, apart from being a friend of mine, is one of the most regarded, renowned, and respected new directors, and we are very happy to say that this man is coming from Italy and from Sicily in particular. I'm talking about Luca Guadagnino. Ciao Luca.
Ciao.
How are you?
Thank you for you make me young.
Yeah, because
I'm 50 next year.
Because I consider you as a young boy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the young and for the boy, despite my hair.
Yeah.
And my balding, receding.
And speaking of young boys, there are many young boys, aspiring filmmakers, moviegoers that are watching us. Okay.
Yes. And young girls.
And young girls, yes, and young
whatever.
Yeah, young whatever. Okay. And today we have to fulfill a claim, a word, which is seeing life through a different lens. So my first question to you, Luca, is to what extent, in what way cinema has allowed you to see life through a different lens?
Well, I think cinema most definitely has been a medium, or maybe in a more poetic way, a window or an open door through different perspectives. Or to paraphrase what I'm saying, I try to find through cinema different perspectives that I kind of aimed for or craved for or unconsciously wanted to. I was discussing today with a very great journalist the idea of the cinema of extreme that I feel like I've been very attracted to, I've been always attracted to. So probably seeing through a different lens is also the possibility to experience something that in a way brings you to extremities.
Extremities makes me think of what one of the previous guests of this panel told me. She was Demi Moore. Mm-hmm. And Demi told me that she tries always to think out of the box. Do you agree with that? I mean, in your work...
That she does? I don't know.
I'm talking about you.
That I do think out of the box?
Yeah.
Well, no, because honestly, to think out of the box means that I kind of have to be in a box or in a specific one, which I don't think I am. I am not very interested in being included. So I'm not particularly interested in the inclusion or exclusion. I like the idea of individuality. So probably from the perspective of other individuals or from the perspective of a system that sets the values for itself, I may be kind of someone out of that box. But from my perspective, I don't know if I think out of the box. I think the way I do think.
When I personally think to seeing life through a different lens, thanks to cinema, I think to maybe the first experiences we as moviegoers have when we enter in a movie theater when we are young and we have a kind of epiphany. For example, for me, E.T. by Steven Spielberg was an epiphanic movie. Okay, is there an experience in your young years similar?
I think I'm going to repeat myself because I already said that many times, but honestly, I saw Lawrence of Arabia when I was like 5 in a movie theater in Ethiopia. And that movie, probably the crossing between that face of Peter O'Toole, his blue eyes, and Omar Sharif, and the desert, and the bigger than life David Lean scope, which I wasn't kind of conscious of then, somehow really hit me very hard. I must say that also E.T. was a very important and revelatory experience of watching a movie, because I think E.T. was a very iconic movie in a very conscious way from Spielberg. Was not afraid of being so. And like when they, I mean, banality, but when they bike through the sky and they go and their shadows are against the moon, which became then the Amblin logo. I mean, that was like really definitely something for someone of 11 years old like I was. You too.
Of course, and I think, I don't know if you agree, Luca, but, and that's a good way, a good example to give them the idea of how a director works. I think on that matter, Steven Spielberg worked with an icon of the horror movies, because the moon in the night was an icon of the horror movies.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
he turned it into something else, something for young kids. Do you agree with that way of not just Steven Spielberg,
Probably
of directors of manipulate the cinema?
Well, the great directors are the iconoclasts. Yeah.
Today we are hoping, especially today during the COVID experience, we are hoping that cinema could be a tool, an instrument to connect people. One of the specific keyword of today's masterclass, to this year's masterclass, is contactless connection. What does it mean to you, the power of connecting people that cinema has?
I don't know, like, of course there is a sort of connection that comes with the fact that we can talk about movies that we have seen in different stages of our lives, maybe when we didn't know each other, like as we did now about E.T. I think I can talk about E.T. with you, you can talk about E.T. with me, and we can talk about E.T. with someone that comes from, I don't know, Senegal or Russia or Mexico. And yet we would be able to recall in our minds and in this shared conversation a kind of similar feelings or emotions that movie gave us, which means that it's a very unifying, possibly universalizing experience, cinema, through time, through space. But I believe that the concept of space and how the space is important in the experience of cinema is as important. Meaning how important it is that we see a movie with other people in a theater. How that is, in a way, what cinema is. You know, like the emotional impact of E.T. resonates through time, probably because of that primal scene that was watching E.T. in 1982 when it came out in theaters all over the world, with in a universal wonderment with a collection of strangers in the same theaters where that was screened. I don't know if you could claim that you could have the same impact in time and space for something that people would experience singularly on their tablets or computers or home theaters, alone, maybe streaming it. I don't know. Of course, maybe I will be kind of either contradicted by facts or somehow become a witness of an irrelevant conversation because it's not going to be needed anymore. But if we talk about cinema as we are doing now, we have to remember the impact on the imagery of cinema, but also how that impact starts with a collective unifying experience. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's important, for instance, that these festivals happens this year.
I was thinking while you were answering that this word that we were talking about earlier, lens, is not just a common word, but it's a specific word of cinema. What are the importance of lenses in your work, and how do you use lenses?
Oh, that's a very specific question, almost obtrusive and indelicate question of my intimacy. It's almost like as if you are
Yeah.
opening the door to my bathroom when I'm having a bath with
Or the
everybody
color of
looking.
your undies.
I don't know if I should respond. You make me blush. But anyway, I can tell you that lenses are a constant topic of conversation with my director of photography, for instance. Which kind of lenses? In terms of the quality of the lenses, the brand of the lenses. And then once we decide which lenses we want to use, what lens to use, for what and how. Call Me By Your Name, we shot it with one lens, 35 millimeters. Suspiria, we use many zoom lenses. But I think the process of creation of a movie for me is always starting from there. It's very technical on a way, it's very intimate on the other way. It tells you what you see and how you see it. For someone who doesn't know how it works, the first time you do something and you realize that what you have in your mind have to be processed to what the lens has in mind. It's quite fascinating.
Why you shot Call Me By Your Name with 35? For those who don't know what 35 millimeters...
35 millimeters, as per Fassbinder, in a way, is the lens that is closer to the scope of the human eye. And so I wanted the movie to feel like a sort of... I wanted the perspective in the movie to be kind of invisible and very humanistic.
And I Am Love?
I Am Love, we use many kind of lenses.
Speaking of tools, of formats, what is your favorite way to watch movies? Do you accept just the theatrical experience, or?
Definitely the theatrical experience is my favorite way of watching a movie, for sure. Otherwise, if I don't see it in a movie theater, I tend to use the time I have to watch part of it, not the entirety of it, unless I need to study something. So, in a way, the home video version of watching a movie is kind of a distraction for me. But nowadays, I'm starting to see films in my dreams a lot. I dream of films that I have not made, or I dream of films that I made, or even better, I dream of films that I know, that I saw, but I dream them in a different way. I redreamt Fanny and Alexander few weeks ago, which was a different Fanny and Alexander, which wasn't better than the original one, but in a way it was the translation in my subconscious of what I had in my mind watching that movie.
Was Sven Nykvist the DOP of your dream?
Probably, yeah.
By the way, if you haven't seen Fanny Alexander, please, thanks to the quote, the mention by Luca Guadagnino, please watch it, because it's it's really a travel. And speaking of technology and format, Luca, you are very, first and foremost, as a moviegoer, I think, before becoming a director, you were very, you were paying attention a lot to form as something that is meaningful itself. How the new technologies can help, if they can, the display of form in films?
It's not a question of means, the language of cinema. It's a question of how you think you want to tell the story and what's your point of view. Cinema is a language that goes beyond the means, to be honest. Jonathan Demme, My Cousin Bobby. It's a beautiful home movie about his cousin, a priest, who lives in the Bronx. He made it with a small crew in the same year in which he was between Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia, big studio movies. And yet the way in which the portrait of Demme, of this cousin, is so affecting and so cinematic. Again, it really doesn't need mean to find a way to make a movie. It's about how you want to tell the story. And for me, cinema is a language, and it has a lot to do with the form of this language, less about the style. In fact, filmmakers who are interested in style, they need the means, or they use the low-key means to create a style with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are the Brian De Palma's movies or the Dario Argento's movies the first one when you were just a moviegoer, when you first, as a moviegoer, started to think about form or other movies?
Well, I saw Psycho when I was 10 or even 9. Speaking of formal movies, I think that was really like the real thing. I saw Fury also very young. I saw Fanny and Alexander when it came out in theaters. I was 13 when it came out. Dario Argento's Suspiria was a sort of revelation for me when I saw it.
In terms of form?
Well, probably I thought it was form, but maybe it was what movies can make to you and how movie can attack you. I'm less interested in the form of Suspiria now that I'm 50 or I'm less convinced that there is a form to that movie. I more believe that Suspiria by Dario Argento speaks for a sort of idea of the senses being assaulted by the movie, and also I see that as a sort of child of Mario Bava.
I've been knowing you for years. I know that you're very independent as a man, just before being a filmmaker. So my next question is, I mean, quite strange in that sense. The question is, were you ever given a piece of advice you were still leaning on today as a filmmaker?
Well, I met Jean-Marie Straub when I was 19, I think 19 or 20, and he had just shot The Death of Empedocles in Segesta Theatre in Sicily, and I went to dinner with him because I had a friend who was the daughter of the assessore of cultural things in Trapani, and there was the dinner with Mr. Straub and Daniel Huillet. And I already was a big fan because I saw Chronicle of Magdalena Bach, and so on and so on. And I was just looking at these artists being themselves. I was already experiencing in that dinner a perspective on life that was very different from the idea of bourgeois that I was growing up with. Let alone the fact that him and his wife were such masters. And my friend made this thing that made me blush. And he said to him, "So, Jean-Marie, what advice do you give to Luca who wants to do cinema school? He wants to go to Rome to do the school of cinema." He looks at me and in Italian with a very heavy German accent tells me, "Don't do it.
Non fallo."
You cannot do cinema school if you want to do cinema." I think about these words still today after almost 30 years.
And your school of cinema was?
Jean-Marie Straub and his movies and other directors' movies.
You were mentioning Luca earlier on, Jonathan Demme, who was like an ideal mentor for you, since you like that much his cinema. Have you ever met Jonathan Demme?
I did. That's interesting. I think 9 years ago, the Milano Film Festival invited him for a celebration of his cinema in a retrospective. It was before Ricky and the Flash, his last movie, for sure. And they asked me to do what you're doing now with me, to interview him for a masterclass at the Piccolo Teatro di Milano. And I interviewed him. And it's interesting because he knew everything I'd done so far at the time. He knew all of my movies until that. It was like I Am Love, I guess, the last one then. And he started to ask me things about my films while we were doing this masterclass on his cinema. which tells you about the man, his generosity and curiosity. And it was interesting because he was a sweet man, very sweet. And so, you know, it's very difficult to meet the people you really love, because sometimes they can be disappointing in terms of the human. And because we are a person, we are people, right? No? And everybody is really entitled to be a jerk if they want to be a jerk.
Right.
So I don't want to meet jerks, so I prefer to think of them the way I do as great artists that I admire. So I am shy, but with Demi, he is great as a human being, as great as a filmmaker.
Great man, and you can.
And then I interviewed him again for Rolling Stone, Italy.
Jonathan Demme with a great voice, great smile.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan, and
Beautiful man.
Yeah, I'm very thankful to you that you underline the character of Jonathan Demme being an humble man, being so generous in.
But he was a very tough director. His movies are really tough, very confrontational, very hard to swallow, and completely layered, and super sophisticated feature films. Like when I hear that Philadelphia is a consolatory mainstream vanilla, as they say in America, idea of the AIDS and homophobia, I found so dull that comment, because if you see the movie and the way in which he uses the language of Hitchcock at the service of a thriller where the guilty person is not guilty of an actual murder, but of a more devastating murder, the murder of the other, because the other cannot be accepted in his or her otherness. I mean, that is only a great filmmaker who can do that. I remember I saw the movie, I came out of the theater and I was shocked. And I wasn't shocked because I was affected by the very melodramatic story of Andrew Beckett dying of AIDS, but because I couldn't grasp the way in which he has been able to make that kind of towering achievement of making a very entertaining movie, but at the same time a super sophisticated investigation of the idea of capitalism in America.
The fact that you just mentioned Philadelphia made me think of Io sono l'amore, because the title comes from that wonderful aria that Tom Hanks listened to in the movie. And Io sono l'amore, I am love, maybe, I don't know, Luca, could be, let me say, a job title for you, in a sense, in that sense that love is, is a center that is a center of many of your movies that you watch in different ways. Is that so? And if it's so, what love is becoming through your work?
I cannot answer the question because this is a question that has been to be asked to someone who has the patience and the interest in analyzing my movies. I cannot analyze myself. What I am interested in depiction of love is that idea that love is in a way a conversation with deaf people or between people that cannot talk. That love is more a projection than the actual reality, but yet this projection is an element that drives you to move onward instead of staying still or going backward. That love, it doesn't exist when it is just existing as it exists. I think that's something very fascinating to me.
I'm now asking you a very...
If you think of, I don't know, you haven't seen Salvatore, my last documentary film on Salvatore Ferragamo, but you know, in the movie you realize that this idea of love is this idea of love that is a sort of individual and kind of prey that you act constantly. It's fully explained in the way in which we realize that Wanda Ferragamo, who loses her husband quite young after a few years of marriage, keeps nurturing that love and that conversation with her beloved husband until she dies last year.
By the way, I personally thank you after many years, Luca, for having depicted on screen what is for me one of the best love encounter between a man and a woman, the one between Edoardo and Tilda, when Edoardo in the country home undresses her very, very slowly. I think in this slow movement that Edoardo Gabriellini makes in this movie, for me, is one of the best images of love.
Well, Emma Recchi is being dressed up constantly by people. She's helped to dress up with this kind of armor that is her wardrobe by her lady-in-waiting, played by Maria Paiato, the wonderful Maria Paiato. And also she's cuffed, almost like a criminal, with this very heavy and symbolic jewelry by her husband, who opens the vault to take off the jewelry and put himself on her. And so when she meets this person that in a way she wants to meet in his otherness and he wants her otherness, she surrenders to him and asks him to free her from this insignia of constriction that comes from the family and the life she comes from. So I don't know if that's love, but definitely it's the erotic tension is not in the nudity, but the erotic tension is in the freeing.
And the trust, because
the trust, yes.
She trusts him. We are going to the conclusion, and since we are talking to young audiences, we mentioned in a way your mentors, masters, whatever. Which piece of advice, I know it's a very hard question, which piece of advice would you give them to those who are maybe now start to embark in this wonderful and at the same time...
I have the advice.
Okay, fantastic.
Do things. Don't wait for people to allow you to do things. If you want to do cinema or anything you want to do it. Find pals, comrades, partner in crime to help you doing things. Give yourself to the other in generosity, but most importantly, think with your mind. And do not put yourself into the anonymous position of making comments on social media that doesn't have responsibility because you can hide yourself. Don't use social media. Use social. Be social. Meet people. Use your opinions, even if those opinions can sound difficult for another person, to open up a conversation. Be open to the other person conversation and these other person ideas. Don't think that you have to think the way in which everybody thinks. When I was young, when I was like 13, 14, and I was growing up in Palermo in the 80s, the Reagan hedonistic times, in which everybody was almost happy to be conformist, but that's a kind of sort of sentiment of all the decades, as Bertolucci were very perfectly expressed to us. I remember I was thinking of these years in which I was growing up, restless in this bourgeois environment of Palermo, and I remember that everybody looked the same with the same hairdo, and everybody was wearing the same shoes and the same clothing and the same jacket. Henry Lloyd was the name for those who could afford, and for those who couldn't afford was Slam. But it was this kind of color block, nylon kind of raincoats that everybody was wearing. And I was thinking, how could you, if you would be making a movie, describe the suffocation of this kind of everybody thinks the same and wear the same and are the same, but at the same time, hopefully try to find in that sameness some kind of individuality. And I thought of this image of all these kids coming off my school wearing the same clothes, but maybe there was someone who had this different color.
Che bello, lo dico in italiano, che bello, che poi è la lingua di Luca, la mia lingua. Wonderful image, this man who dreams movies just gave us. And so, if you allow me, Luca, I would like to conclude with an emotional touch. I'm going to conclude this encounter with you with a more intimate question, which is referring to a different lens, which is the main lens, the lens of our eyes. always referring to Tom Hanks's eyes while listening to Io sono l'amore aria.
He's blind in that moment.
Yeah.
One eye doesn't work, I think, in that moment of his.
But at the same time, he kind of cry.
Yeah.
Okay? So, when did you cry while working as a director? And when?
Never. I would not be able to cry because the imperative of the mayhem that is surrounding a movie set is such that you cannot cry, or you cry for desperation. But I don't want to cry for desperation because I would sound weak to the producers who have to be doing
just
their job.
An emotional, I don't know, display of yourself. Never, while watching. Never.
No, because it's raw. It's in the. It's like as if I was scared watching horror moments in Suspiria shooting. No, this was fun. I don't know.
Just
No.
fun. Okay.
No.
And the second part of the question was: is there any movie that makes your personal lens always?
I cry all the time at the movies. All the time. I cried. Remember, I was with. My very close friend Valentina Cervi, and we went on an afternoon screening of Ricordati di me by Gabriele Muccino, and we were very giggly, and we drank this. I think we came out of a long time in which we were dieting like crazy because we were obsessed with being slim, and then we said, fuck off, let's have popcorns and milkshake, and so we started to eat like crazy, and the exhilaration of the sugar made us be so happy with the movie, and we cried and we laughed.
Che bello, un po' di sugar. I cannot conclude the interview without asking you the very last question, which is, speaking of connection, what is your connection to Venice? I think you have different connections with Venice and with Venice.
An obvious one is that the first time I was invited to a festival to this festival was in 2009 by Alberto Barbera when he invited the protagonists. So I'm happy to say that I have a very strong connection with Alberto.
And if you would have to shoot just a movie just here in Venice, what kind of movie would it be?
This year, or that I saw in Venice throughout the decades?
To shoot a movie in the Laguna, in Venice, what kind of movie?
I shot my TV show, We Are Who We Are, is entirely shot in the region of Chioggia. So not taking anything off of Venezia, but Chioggia is much more cinematic to me.
Okay.
Go to Chioggia, don't go to Venezia.
But the Chiogiotti...
I love Chiogiotti, so nice people.
Yeah, but the Chiogiotti were the historic enemies of Venetians.
I am with the Chioggiottis.
Thank you so much.
They don't charge you the amount of money they charge you in Venezia for a sandwich.
No, don't close with that. Close just with
Guys,
a message of hope.
Get a MasterCard to pay when you come to Venice, because otherwise you cannot consume anything.